really interesting fight at lightweight as we have Spain's El Fenomeno Joel Alvarez taking on Russia's, and Blackberry Smoke would like this. Waiting on the thunder. Russian Thunder, Alexander Yakovlev. And Matt, I'm excited about this fight because we don't have a lot of lightweights that are 6'3", and you have two of them right there now. Have I pulled out my measuring tape? Have I seen these guys in person? No. So only weigh-in day will tell us how tall who is who. But in this fight, I mean, Joel Alvarez, we've seen it out of him so far in his UFC tenure. 2-1. The first fight against Damir Ismagulov, former champ with M1 Global. We saw Yakovlev coming into the UFC. He'd fought for a couple different organizations, but mainly M1 Global. And for Alvarez, it was just way too much against Ismagulov. And to me, where have you been, Damir? It's been since last summer since we've seen him. I'd like to see a lot more of him. It was the pressure of Ismagulov and the wrestling that really get to Alvarez. Now, his next two times out, I mean, against Danilo Belluardo, great submission win there. Ground and pound in the second round. He was all over him. He was fishing for subs in the first. And in his last one, he was taking on Irish Joe Duffy in a fight where he was a plus 275 underdog on the broadcast. We told you to pick Alvarez. We did. That was one of those big Hail Mary underdogs. He got the win. Now, from Alvarez, what do we know? Really slippery jiu-jitsu. And we've seen it. Out of those 17 total wins, 15 of them by submission. Former AFL champ. And when he came into the UFC, it was a bit of a head scratcher. You got this guy with a really good record. Is it overly padded? And then he comes in and he has that Ismagulov loss. At this point in his career, you're still in your 20s. You've got an immaculate record. What's the ceiling for Joel Alvarez? I don't really know. Now, he's taking on Alexander Yakovlev, and you might say, hey, where have you been, Yakovlev? Well, I can't tell you that, but I can tell you that 170 pounds, Yakovlev took on two of the best fighters that the UFC has in Demian Maia and Kamaru Usman. Did he beat them? No. Did he get finished by them? No. He lost decisions against both of them. But he's a really tough out. He's got a win over Paul Daly on his career, which is pretty impressive. But lately, it's been a mixed bag. And I mean, if you want to look at his last 5 fights, we're going back almost 5 years ago when he took on George Sullivan. He beat him. Lost to Usman, lost to Zach Cummins by submission, beat Alex De Silva, and there was a long layoff between those two fights. The loss to Cummins and the win over De Silva. And De Silva was a pretty touted prospect coming out of Brazil. I know he hasn't looked great in the UFC. And then Yakovlev comes out about a year ago and loses to Roosevelt Roberts. That's a tough one. You've got Yakovlev, who has the Sambo background, and he's got a good wrestling pedigree as well coming out of Russia. You got the submission abilities out of Joel Alvarez that we've seen used in practice in the UFC. It's a tough fight to predict in two of the bigger guys at 155. I mean, they're in that recently released category like James Vick. Just so tall for this division.
And it should be a really interesting matchup. It's not often that you can say, I think Joel Alvarez might even win by guillotine. And not just because that's his best submission. The striking of Joel Alvarez doesn't get enough credit. We talk about the submission game. The submission game's how he beat Joe Duffy. But he stays really tall as a striker. And the reason he gets so many submissions is people try to take him down. It's not really to the effect of the Brian Ortega where it's, okay, your striking's pretty good, so let me shoot for takedowns. And you're just so good at jiu-jitsu. But for Alvarez, it's, if you do have that lazy takedown attempt, he is going to catch a neck or an arm or make sure that the scramble is always going to end in his favor. I do like his striking in this. For Yakovlev, it's just really hard to know what you're going to get because we've seen so many versions of him in the UFC, and I've never seen one version of Alexander Yakovlev, and I've gone, wow, he could be a top 15 guy. He's well-rounded in his skill set. There's not this one thing. It's not like, okay, his striking's not good, so just make sure he doesn't take you to the ground. He's at least serviceable at everything. A loss to Roosevelt Roberts, especially knowing what we know now about Roberts, it doesn't look all that great going into a fight against Joel Alvarez, a guy who can do a lot of the things Roberts can, who size-wise matches up with a guy like Roberts, is a tall, thinner guy for the division. So Joel Alvarez, I just don't really see how he loses this fight. And I wasn't even on his hype train. I didn't think he was... Well, I thought it was going to be Joe Duffy, but I did think Joe Duffy was going to be a harder fight for him. And for him to go out there and get that first round stoppage, I was really impressed, and it really made me buy into the hype.
Well, that's the thing, Matt. Like, if you want to talk about buying into the hype, now, we're a little early on these picks just due to circumstance, but the odds are insane. Joel Alvarez went from being a plus 275 underdog in his last fight to a minus 275 favorite in this one. Yakovlev plus 215 is the underdog. If you look over on Tapology, limited sample size, this fight was just announced. Out of 322 votes, 88% going Alvarez, 62% saying he's going to win by submission. You're buying too much into the hype, odds makers and fans. Do I think he's going to win?
Yeah.
Yes. And would that lend credence to the odds being where they're at? Well, maybe not. But with Alexander Yakovlev, I like what you said. I mean, he's serviceable at everything. He's a very well-rounded guy. At 36, is he going to make a run at lightweight that's going to knock your socks off? I don't really think so. I do like Joel Alvarez in this one simply due to the fact that if he gets taken down, he's slippery on the ground. His striking's not the best. I wouldn't expect him to go out there and get a spinning wheel kick knockout or go full Joaquin Buckley on us, but I do think that, the not the sky's the limit, just a notch down from that. It's one of those shoot for the stars, and even if you miss, or shoot for the moon, even if you'll miss, you'll land among the stars.
Other way around.
One of those corny cliches, but overall, I do see this one for Alvarez in this fight.
I agree. It is nothing against Yakovlev, but like you had said, at 37, it's hard to say, yeah, he's going to go on a run. He's like Alistair Overeem at this stage in his career. I think Alvarez, the upside's a lot higher for him, and I'm really excited to see where he goes from this fight. But yeah, I've got Joel Alvarez.
Matt, we're both going with Joel Alvarez to get the win in this one. You're not going to want to miss the rest of predictions for this card because there's a lot of under-the-radar fights, but you cannot miss the two fights at the top. Co-main event, Robert Whittaker, Jared Cannonier. Our main event of the evening with Khabib Nurmagomedov unifying the belts, maybe, against Justin Gaethje, unifying the belts. So you're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say, Matt, let's get into it. Really good fight at 125 pounds. We have Georgia's She-Wolf, Liana Jojua, and Matt, Georgia putting on an absolute storm in 2020. I mean, the Georgian fighters that have competed, it seems like nobody's lost so far. Now, I say that, you knock on wood, because we have a card, as we're taping this, that's going on with UFC Fight Night, Ortega, Korean Zombie, a little bit behind baseball. But in this one, Liana Jojua, in her debut against Sarah Morris at 135 pounds, it did not go her way. UFC 242 on the big stage, on short notice, up a weight class. She got submitted. So what does she do? Comes out at 125 against Diana Belbizia, I would say an adopted Canadian training out of Stony Creek, Ontario, but against Romania's Belbizia, she capitalized on the mistakes that Belbizia made. She took the fight to the ground, got a great submission win there. So for Liana Jojua, what we do know, if we just scrap that Sarah Morris fight out of our minds, she has really good grappling, really good takedowns, and good jiu-jitsu. You saw that in her last time out. For Miranda Maverick, finally making her UFC debut, she was originally supposed to take on Mara Romero Barella. And I say originally, we did a video on it. You can check it out. But Miranda Maverick, like a buzzsaw through Invicta. Good striking, good takedown defense, good grappling in her own right. And oh, by the way, a southpaw. Now, both of these fighters, I mean, you got Jojua, 25 years old. You got Miranda Maverick at 23. I mean, with a few wins for either of these fighters, A, you're ranked, but B, you're just moving up through those ranks. And it's a pretty... It's not the most stacked division of women's MMA. Strawweight definitely is. I like the matchmaking here. I think it's a great job, and I'm really looking forward to this fight.
I agree, and at 125 for especially the women's flyweight division, there are a lot of these young prospects moving their way up, and not that they're kind of aging out some of the older fighters in the division, but at 125, the majority of the fighters there are former Invicta champs or women who have been in the Ultimate Fighter or who have just fought kind of in other global organizations. So for both these two to be fighting at this young of age in the division, you can just move your way up the ranks very fast. We saw it with Macy Barber. She was in the top 10 in like 2 fights, and she's younger than I am, I think. So it's kind of crazy. For Miranda Maverick, like you had mentioned, and this is something we talk about a lot too, level of competition outside the UFC. Miranda Maverick, coming over from Invicta, fought just a who's who. She fought Deanne Bennett. She fought Pearl Gonzalez. Like, these are fighters who...
Shanny Young, too, is in the UFC.
Exactly. And just those 3 wins, when you look through, a lot of other fighters coming into the UFC do not have 3 wins of that caliber on their resume. So for Miranda Maverick to be 23 and already have 3 of those wins, I think the sky really is the limit for her in this division. And for Jojua, it's going to be interesting because I thought that Sarah Morris loss was really bad. I'm not going to lie. Like, an exceptionally bad loss because it looked like she kind of just got tired and gave up. And that's the last thing you ever want to see in an MMA fighter. But, luckily, after she moved down in weight, she did look really good in her last performance. It's just, I have a hard time picking against Miranda Maverick in this fight, just to let my prediction out a little bit early, because she does everything at least on par with what Jojua does, and then I'd say her striking is a little bit better, or I would say quite a bit better, honestly. I think the cardio is on Maverick's side. I do think the wrestling's on her side, too. If Jojua is able to get the fight on the ground, her jiu-jitsu might be able to make things interesting, but I just think the wrestling defense of Miranda Maverick is going to be able to keep her at bay for long enough to really let her striking open up throughout the fight.
I think it's a good fight, and if we go over to Tapology, again, limited sample size, we're early this week, but out of 443 total votes, 77% going Maverick, 77% saying she's going to get the win by decision. If we look at the odds, I don't like them. I mean, Maverick opened a minus 140. That line drops so quick, and she's a minus 324 favorite at this point. Liana Jojua open plus 110. She's now a plus 253. I think this is one where maybe you have Maverick at like a 2-1. I do not like those odds where she's at now. I think that Jojua, I mean, as an underdog, it's not a terrible pick. I won't side with her, but I think that she definitely has more than an opportunity than the fans and the odds makers are saying. I definitely do like Miranda Maverick in this one, though. I think that her takedown defense, like you said, on par. I would like in this fight almost, and it's a weird one, but remember when Jinyu Fry fought Kay Hansen? It's kind of similar to that one. Can Jojua take her down and get on top and really start to work some of the grappling? I don't know if she'll be able to, and I definitely like the striking of Miranda Maverick. I'm going Maverick in this one. You're going Maverick in this one. Will she walk out to Kurt Angle's walkout song? Who knows? Or is it Colby Covington's? I like this fight. It should be a great card. I mean, our main event, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Justin Gaethje. You're not going to want to miss that one. Check out the playlist. Matt, keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. Really exciting fight at 205 pounds. We have Un Jung taking on Smiling Sam Alvey. And Matt, we've had Un Jung's training partner, Jun Young Park, competing here recently with the UFC. Big fight against John Phillips, where he, as Matt Allen would say, beat the brakes off of him. So, is it going to be a repeat from Korea Top Team with Un Jung? I mean, early in the video, I'm going to say yes, but he's taking on Smiling Sam Alvey. And Matt, for Sam Alvey, you look at his total body of work, and it's insane. I mean, it seems like yesterday he was fighting a really tough out in Daniel Kelly. That was 5 years ago. It's crazy. And I mean, if you go through his record, he's beaten good competition. Beat Gerald Meerschaert on the regional scene, beat Nate Marquardt in the UFC, beat Rashad Evans, beat Jean Vellante. But since all of these good things, he's lost 4 in a row to Little Nog, Jimmy Crute, Clidson Abreu, and Ryan Spann in a fight where that one was actually closer than you'd want a Ryan Spann fight to be. For Sam Alvey, kudos to you. I mean, you lost, but he gave a good account of himself. But for Un Jung, I mean, this is a guy, you look for his total body of work, plenty of finishes. If it's not a finish, he's winning it by decision. I mean, his first 2 fights, yeah, he lost to Junsu Lim by majority decision. That was 5 years ago. And he got submitted by Rocky Martinez. But the last time I checked, Rocky Martinez was a huge heavyweight competing in the UFC. He's got a fight coming up. And Un Jung is one of the premier light heavyweights at this juncture in the division. And with a few more wins, this is just like women's flyweight. You get a couple quick wins at light heavyweight, boom, you're up in the top 15, taking on really good competition. This is a really good measuring stick for Un Jung, and I think it should be a good fight.
I agree. Sam Alvey should only fight people who are making their UFC debuts. And there's no disrespect to Sam Alvey. But
yes, it is.
It is, but at this point in his career, that's kind of what he should be used for. Because Sam Alvey, is he tough? Yes, he is. Is he going to throw a lot of volume? Not really. But if he hits you with shots, they're not going to knock you out, but they will at least kind of stun you. I consider Sam Alvey a good kind of warm-up fight, like in boxing. Like in boxing, let's say you're going to fight Manny Pacquiao and you want to get ready for a southpaw. You're going to fight 4 southpaws just to get ready for the big one. This is a great example because Sam Alvey, he's not this, vicious power puncher, but he does have enough pop on his shots that if he does catch you, you're going to be like, okay, after I beat Sam Alvey, I'm not going to get caught by these punches in my next fight. And that's how confident I am with Un Jung. I asked Craig before the video, and I'm going to put this out to the fans. When was the last time going into a Sam Alvey fight that you felt very confident, like this is the one that he's going to get?
Little Nog.
And then he got knocked out by him. So, again, if Little Nog 2 years ago is able to knock you out, then I'm assuming an up-and-coming prospect at 205 in Un Jung should be able to have similar levels of success. Now, with Sam Alvey, he does have a deceiving ground game that we don't really get to see a lot of. He has really nice front chokes, a really good guillotine. So if you do get lazy with your takedowns, he can capitalize off those. And the amount of experience he's had throughout his career, that's why I do think he is a good measuring stick, because Sam Alvey's seen everything that you can do. And yes, he's lost, 14 of his 30... Well, yeah, he's lost 14 times. But he's out there putting on great performances, or at least trying against the top level of competition. He has close fights. I thought he lost the Jean Vellante fight too, so really I think he should have lost 5 in a row. But I think the cardio is about average enough that I don't think he's going to really get tired. He's always going to have that constant pressure with that really mad face going forward. And if he does land a big bomb, he can hurt you. But I don't think Un Jung is going to be like Marcin Prachnio, who's just kind of walked forward towards Sam Alvey and just kept on hitting punches and walking forward with his hands down. I think Un Jung should be able to get it done by stoppage. And for Sam Alvey, it's really this weird part of his career because he used to fight at 185. He got a little bit older, so he's like, okay, my body's more adjusted to 205. But normally when fighters do make that weight jump because they have to physically, they do great at that next weight class. Robert Whittaker, for instance, he never missed his weight. Now, it's hard to compare Robert Whittaker to Sam Alvey, just skill-wise. I know I'm comparing one of the better middleweights of all time to Sam Alvey, but still. when guys just make that initial move up in weight, RDA, Robert Whittaker,
Luke Rockhold.
Not Luke Rockhold, Kelvin Gastelum. There's a lot of examples of guys move up in weight when they really need to, and since it was more they physically just had to move up in weight because they couldn't do it anymore, then it was a problem for them. But for a guy like Sam Alvey and a lot of these other older middleweights who have moved up to light heavyweight, kind of past their prime, it hasn't worked out for them. And Sam Alvey, it's not like he had this big speed advantage moving up. He doesn't have a power advantage moving up. And that's another thing that you really have to worry about. The jump between 185 and 205 is a lot bigger than that jump between 170 and 185. Now, only by 5 pounds, but we see a lot. Physically, welterweights now look a lot like middleweights. Like Wonderboy Thompson, stand him next to pretty much any middleweight, and you're like, oh, they're about the same size. Or Douglas Lima, Kamaru Usman even. Like, welterweights now are much bigger than they used to be in kind of the GSP era. And really, fighters in general are. But Sam Alvey didn't bring a lot of competitive edges with him from middleweight to the 205-pound division. And I think Un Jung, you look at what he does well. Is he a better grappler than Sam Alvey? Probably. Does he hit harder? I think he has better output in his shots. I think the
good takedown defense.
He's got good takedown defense if Sam Alvey is trying to get this fight to the ground. I just don't see the one area that Sam Alvey does so exceptionally well that he's going to be able to really make this a competitive fight.
I mean, the fans see it the same way. Over on Tapology, 475 votes, 91% going Jung, 80% seeing him getting the win by knockout. In terms of the odds, he's a big favorite. One of the biggest favorites on this card. He opened to minus 600. There's actually been quite a bit of money coming in on Sam Alvey. Un Jung right now, a minus 384 average. And for Sam Alvey, open to plus 400. He's now plus 296. Be wary of this fight, but I gave my prediction early on, and for all the reasons that you stated. Un Jung is a really good striker. I know both these guys, if you look at UFC stats, they're going to be a little skewed for Un Jung because he only had the 2 fights, the Hadis Ibrahimov win, and then the win over Slow Mike Rodriguez. Yeah, so he's got a negative striking differential. Sam Alvey, for what it's worth, and as long as he's been in the UFC, negative striking differential. Good takedown defense for both guys. Sam Alvey's not the type of guy to shoot. Again, you know that his grappling is going to be half decent. You know his clinch work's pretty good too, coming out of Team Quest. And I mean, that's just a legacy type of gym right there that you don't hear enough out of. But overall, yeah, I like the fighter on the left-hand side. I think Korea's going to have 2 big wins out of the same gym in 2 weeks. And I've got Un Jung. You've got Un Jung. Locked, sealed, signed, delivered, whatever you want to say. We both have Un Jung to get the win. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. We have a great card, including a main event for the ages between Justin Gaethje looking to unify the belt against Khabib Nurmagomedov at lightweight. So, as we always say, Matt, Fight Night Picks. Let's get into it. Low-key banger on UFC 254. This is a dark horse for fight of the night. We have Brazilian Cowboy Oliveira taking on the UFC debutant in the Nomad, Shavkat Rakhmonov. And Matt, if I know anything about MMA, the guy on the left's a lot of fun to watch. But if you don't know the guy on the right, you're missing out. Shavkat Rakhmonov, the former M1 Global welterweight champ, he's undefeated at 12-0. All of his wins by finish. He has very rarely seen the 3rd round. You go through his record. It's amazing. It's impressive. He fought decent competition over with M1. You want to go back and watch his fight against Marcelo Brito. That one's free on YouTube with M1 Global. Finishes him with a body shot to the liver. You want to go to his last fight against Thiago Varejao. That fight is so much fun to watch. I mean, Varejao, black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Rakhmonov is ballsy enough to take him down. He's got a nice judo throw over the shoulder. He was going for guillotines. Varejao was going for guillotines. Then Rakhmonov decides, I'm going crazy. Let's go nuts. And he throws a spinning kick to the body, hits him clean, throws a spinning wheel kick, and then he finishes him on the ground. This guy's so much fun to watch, and the UFC has so much faith in him that the fights that he's been booked in that have fallen apart really tells me a lot about this fighter. Originally booked to face Bartosz Fabinski earlier on in this year, that event scrapped. Then he was supposed to take on Ramzan Emeev. He had to withdraw from that fight. Then he was supposed to take on, not Alex Oliveira for this fight, but Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos. Zaleski dos Santos is out. Now we get Alex Oliveira. And I love the matchup, Matt. I really do. Because both of these guys are all-action fighters. And for Shavkat Rakhmonov, I mean, Kazakhstan, he was going to become Kazakhstan's first fighter in the UFC. There's been a lot of Kazakh fighters now. I mean, it seems like that's the way of the world. We've got Maria Agapova competing now. We've got a really tough out in Zhalgas Shumagulov, who just had a fight booked. And on this card, you have 2 Kazakh fighters in Shavkat Rakhmonov, and later on in the card, Sergey Morozov as well. So it's awesome to see that part of the world represented in the UFC at the highest stage. Now, again, we're going from right to left. On the left-hand side, Alex Oliveira, an all-action fighter. He can get it done on the ground. He can get it done on the feet. What do you make of this one? Because I think it's an awesome fight, and I'm really excited.
Yeah, I'm extremely excited for this. And I think Alex Oliveira, he's kind of the perfect guy at 170 to just throw in on short notice into any fight. And it's sort of a disservice to him because it does seem like every time we're talking about a Brazilian cowboy fight that we're talking about the fact that, oh, he's taking this fight on 3 days' notice. But you know what you're going to get. He's got a really good pace. He throws those great kind of whipping front kicks. He uses range really well. The weird thing is that he does make a lot of sort of basic mistakes, if you will. And Rakhmonov, this is a great first fight for him because if he can get past the Alex Oliveira fight, this reminds me a lot of Nicholas Dalby on his first fight back to the UFC because, of course, he also fought Brazilian Cowboy. It's just a great fight because you know what you're going to get with Alex Oliveira. You're going to get that all-action style. He's good on the ground. He's good on the feet. He's just kind of awkward everywhere, so you'll never be comfortable no matter what stage of the fight you're at. So for Rakhmonov, it comes down to, okay, has your level of competition over at M1 Global really gotten you ready for the UFC? And again, being a champ in that organization, then coming over, Oliveira is going to be better than a lot of the people you have fought over there. And no disrespect to them, but I do think Alex Oliveira, as a skill set, yes, he's been inconsistent, but if you just look at how good he is at striking, well, he's got really good Muay Thai. You look at him on the ground. Yes, the top level, like jiu-jitsu guys like Gunnar Nelson can beat him on the ground, but for the most part, he gives a lot of guys trouble. He was able to submit Tim Means. And then on the feet, he does make mistakes. So if Rakhmonov can use his striking to really break up the odd rhythm and timing of Alex Oliveira, I do think he can start to have success as the fight goes on because Oliveira, he has such a high output that the cardio will sort of fade as it goes on. We saw that in the Mike Perry fight, of course. So Rakhmonov, I think this is a great fight for him to really get known by the North American audience.
And you bring that up and you say North American audience. I mean, Alex Oliveira is a big deal in Brazil, but he's also a big deal in North America. He's a global type of power.
He is, and he's one of those weird fighters that I say, like, Emil Mek's not the best welterweight in the world, but he's a guy who, he's outside the rankings, but the average person might kind of know who he is. He has a little bit more buzz behind him, and I have Alex Oliveira kind of in that category, not to cut you off.
Now, Alex Oliveira, in his last two fights, wins. The one over Max Griffin, the one over Peter Sabata was really surprising. I saw a lot of people going with Sabata as far as picking that one. This one is a tough one because, again, Shavkat Rakhmonov, it's his first fight in the UFC. Over on Tapology, limited sample size, 328 total votes, 58% going Oliveira, 74% predicting a decision win for him. The odds right now, Oliveira open a minus 150. He's now minus 175 or thereabouts. I'm sure those odds are going to change the week goes along. Rakhmonov open plus 130, now at a plus 150 or thereabouts over on Best Fight Odds. So the fans are going with Oliveira. The bettors and odds makers going with Alex Oliveira. I am not. I'm going with Shavkat Rakhmonov, and here's why. I love the striking. I really do. Good head movement. He can move side to side quite well. He can push back and forth very well. Usually you don't get that out of MMA striking. You'll see somebody move in and out well, but side to side they're not as good. This guy, very, very well-rounded. Not to say that Oliveira isn't. I just do like what I've seen out of Shavkat Rakhmonov from those M1 Global fights. You see him rocking the Guerrilla Fight Championships shirt all the time. Really good training partners as well in his corner. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes out there. Maybe not necessarily a statement win, but I feel like even if he picks up a decision, which is totally off kilter for him because all 12 of the wins by finish, if you pick up a good decision win over Alex Oliveira, it really sets you up well in the UFC. This is a pop and popcorn. You're enjoying the fight. You sit back and watch it and get what you get, but I think this is an easy contender for Fight of the Night, and I'm going with Shavkat Rakhmonov.
So I do think Rakhmonov can get it done. I'm going to pick him as well. The inconsistency of Alex Oliveira, it gives me some problems because he's a guy who can get hit, and against a guy who has good power and good submission skills in Rakhmonov, I don't like a guy who makes a lot of mistakes. If it was another guy outside the top 15 who... I'm trying to think. Let's say he was fighting like a Santiago Ponzinibbio. I know he's higher up in the rankings. Or even like a Mike Perry. If it was a guy who had that kind of one-punch knockout power, I'd be a little bit more concerned. But Oliveira, he is a rhythm fighter, and he does have to get into his rhythm for things to really be going his way. Another weird thing for Alex Oliveira, weird X factor, without a crowd, I'm always concerned about how he's going to perform because he's one of these guys who really feeds off the energy of the crowd. He's always dancing when he's walking out trying to have fun. So it's always odd to me when fighters like that, like Kevin Lee would be another example of if he, well, I guess he's getting both of his ACLs fixed, but if he comes back, fighters like that who do really feed off the energy of the crowd, I'm always concerned. And I know it can vary fight to fight, but that's always something I have in the back of my mind. I'm going to pick Rakhmonov. I think this is a great introduction to North American crowds and the UFC audience for him.
I mean, Oliveira, the win over Sabata, no crowd, but still, title. He is one of those all-action type of guys. Everybody likes a good Alex Oliveira fight, and I think soon everybody's going to like Shavkat Rakhmonov fights. We're both going with the Kazakh fighter here, Shavkat Rakhmonov. Really looking forward to this card. Great co-main event, probably a middleweight title eliminator between Robert Whittaker and Jared Cannonier, and our main event unifying the interim and actual lightweight belts. You have Khabib Nurmagomedov taking on Justin Gaethje. Matt, I'm really looking forward to it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. Matt, from the picture in front of us, Casey Kenney had a little bit too much fun on Fight Island. Now, he can't be having a lot of fun taking on Nathaniel Wood. This is a fight that's really well matched. I love the fact that Sean Shelby and crew were able to put this one together because the prospect, well, I think he's a little bit past the prospect stage. I mean, we got to have that conversation. You're 27 years old and you've had 21 pro fights. You're not a prospect anymore. Change your nickname, but keep your mustache. He's taking on Casey Kenney, who, while he might be sunburnt, this guy's on an absolute run. And I know he's got that loss to Merab Dvalishvili on his record, but at this point, Merab in the top 15 in the bantamweight division. Casey Kenney's knocking on that door of the top 15. And so is Nathaniel Wood. And I mean, on his record, the lone blemish so far, really in the UFC, that everybody likes to point out is the second to last fight against John Dodson, where it did not go well for him. I mean, it did until it didn't, and that's always an easy thing to say, but he got caught. It wasn't a good finish, especially if you're a big Wood fan. But I mean, his last time out, he was taking on short notice opponent in John Castaneda, a guy coming in from Combate, and he absolutely whooped him. And Matt, the thing that I like, and we talk about these guys both being well-rounded, in that fight, Nathaniel Wood landed 58 of 67 total strikes to the legs. And I mean, he really mixed it up well. By percentage, 45% to the head, 10% to the body, 44% to the legs. And he can employ the takedowns. He went 1 of 3 out of that fight. We're really a pro Casey Kenney show, but we're also a very pro Nathaniel Wood show. This is a tough one to try and predict. I mean, we were saying with Casey Kenney picking up the win in his last time out, which was not that long ago. I mean, it seems like we were just talking about Casey Kenney because he fought less than 2 weeks ago against Haile Alatang. He put on a great performance. He had to worry about the power of Alatang in that one. He was able to withstand it and put on a really good performance. He looked great in that fight.
So I never think it's a good idea to have 2 professional MMA fights within 1 month, and I don't think I'm alone in that. I think that's probably common knowledge, not a good idea. But for Casey Kenney, it is crazy too. You would think if you have such a quick turnaround, well, he probably got a really quick knockout. No, he won by decision. It was just so one-sided of a beating that he is able to have such a quick repeat. And this is an interesting fight because you hate to see either guy lose at this stage in their career because I really do think, maybe not the sky's the limit, but I think both these guys will be in the top 15 for a long time. I think Merab Dvalishvili is another guy. Like, those three, at one point I would have even had Brad Katona in that group. Like, there was kind of these young guys moving up the division. It felt like they were kind of pushing the older guys out. And Casey Kenney, not that he is the new Nathaniel Wood, because he's a little disrespectful to Nathaniel Wood, but after the Dodson loss, I feel like that's when people started really making the petition of, okay, it's Wonder Man, not Wonder Boy Stephen Thompson. We got to get rid of the prospect. But Casey Kenney at this point, after the Alatang win, it's hard to get that much. It's hard to get that much more excited for a Casey Kenney fight, I really should say. But this, stylistically, you're gonna have the phenomenal scrambles from both guys. On the feet, both guys have power. The output's gonna be really high, and you know that neither guy is going to have bad cardio, where it's gonna be okay. Maybe Nathaniel Wood rocks Casey Kenney, blows his load, trying to get him out of there in the first round, and then it's sort of just a one-sided fight from there on for Kenney because Wood gets tired. I think this can be a phenomenal fight for as long as it lasts. I'm really having a hard time picking because you have to remember, before that Dodson loss, Nathaniel Wood was on his way to being in that top 10, in that top 5 conversation. A lot of people thought if there is going to be a guy to just kind of run through the rankings quick and get a title shot, maybe Nathaniel Wood could be that guy. Now, losing to a guy like John Dodson, especially at this stage in Dodson's career, now of course no longer with the UFC, it's too bad because Nathaniel Wood, you wanted him to kind of have that not swan song, but you want him to keep on going up. The Dodson loss, for as bad as it is, I don't think you can take a loss from it going into the Casey Kenney fight because Casey Kenney doesn't fight anything like John Dodson. John Dodson's got that phenomenal footwork, hand speed. He's got good power. But with Kenney, it's going to be a lot more kicks. It's going to be a lot more wrestling. And it's going to be a much more grueling style of a fight for Nathaniel Wood.
It's like 1A, 1B. It's like Gemini Man, but one of them's not older. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Will Smith movies that didn't really crack it. Now, if we have a look quickly over at the predictions on Tapology, very limited sample size. We're early this week at a 349 total votes, 64% going Kenney, 87% predicting a decision win. I was kind of surprised by the odds, the fact that Casey Kenney's as big of a favorite as he is. Now, he opened a respectable minus 145, and I say respectable. Normally, you'd say that if it was somebody that was a 3-1 favorite or more, but I think that is fair. He's now minus 193 average over there. For Nathaniel Wood, open plus 115, now at a plus 164. Again, these guys are so well-rounded, and this is so well-matched that it is a tough one to try and predict. Now, you had mentioned as well, for Casey Kenney to really get moving and going, he's got to employ the leg kicks. We might want to see some of the grappling out of both of these guys. Numbers-wise, very similar in just about every category. Both with positive striking differentials, both with good striking accuracy, close to 50%. A little bit better defense for Kenney. He's a southpaw. Nathaniel Wood's orthodox. They can switch stances. And for grappling, pretty darn close. I mean, Casey Kenney's takedown defense isn't as good, but there's a reason. Hold up. There's a reason why all stats aren't created equal. We always talk about this. The Ray Borg fight that Casey Kenney won, he got taken down a number of times. The fight against Merab was one of the craziest fights because Merab went something, it was 12 for 24 out of his total takedowns. That's why Casey Kenney's defense isn't that great. Exactly. Because it's skewed by those two performances. But normally, it is decent, and he has good offensive takedowns. So both these guys well matched. The thing that I do like about Casey Kenney, he's taken on tougher competition. Win over Ray Borg, win over Bermudez. The loss against Merab tells you a lot. Beats Luis Smolka by finish, beats Haile Elatang. The level of competition's kind of going up and down a little bit, but also being the former flyweight, interim flyweight, and interim bantamweight LFA champ, that definitely lends credence. Nathaniel Wood's wars and Cage Warriors, and I say wars, you got to go back and watch those. But in the UFC, Johnny Eduardo, Andre Ewell, Jose Teco Quinones loses to Dodson, beats Castaneda, a guy from Combate. It's not the same level. Now, you're beating Castaneda, all three judges scoring at 30-27. In Casey Kenney's last fight, 30-25, 30-26, and 30-27. The guy's on a run. I got to go with the favorite and a guy that really should invest in just a little bit of sunscreen.
I mean, it's hard to go against that. And you could say that for both guys. They could both use some sunscreen. Casey Kenney's kicking game is really going to be what this fight's going to come down to. I think wrestling-wise, like you had said, they're both fairly even. But if Nathaniel Wood is going for a lot of takedowns, it might play into Casey Kenney's game plan. Because, again, I can't just tell you how good the scrambles of Casey Kenney are. Now, yes, Merab Dvalishvili, he just, from a physical standpoint, was kind of able to hold Kenney down. But if you're able to stuff, 12 of the 24 takedowns that he went with, I would consider that at least a small victory. So I'm going to agree, Casey Kenney. But this is such a battle of the prospects, if you will, of two guys who are outside the top 15 who I think can make a lot of noise in the bantamweight division for a long time.
Matt, really looking forward to this. We're both going with Casey Kenney to get the win. We got a great card headlined by a title unification bout between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Justin Gaethje. You're not going to want to miss that. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. We've got a weird fight at heavyweight, and I say it's a weird fight because there have been hype trains for both of these guys at multiple points in their career, which might seem strange because with Stefan Struve in his last 5 fights, he's 1-4. For Tai Tuivasa, 2-3, but he's on a 3-fight losing streak. And at heavyweight, that's never a good place to be in. And I remember reading, this was months ago, Tai Tuivasa no longer with the UFC. Now, he's still with them because he has this fight against Stefan Struve. And a lot of people are going to point to Stefan Struve to 2 things. One, his fight against Stipe Miocic, really big win. The other thing, his fight against Ben Rothwell the last time out. It was a fight where he was winning, he was having a lot of success, Rothwell was pressuring him, but then Dan Miragliotta just kind of pushed Stefan Struve into the category of be tough, be cool, keep fighting. And he did, and he ended up losing to Ben Rothwell. So it's been a while since we've seen Stefan Struve. That fight was almost a year ago, about 10 months ago for Struve. For Tai Tuivasa, the last time we saw him out, it was a year ago against Sergey Spivak. He got manhandled by Sergey. I mean, the polar bear. Before that, a loss to Blagoy Ivanov. Before that, a knockout loss to Junior Dos Santos. So there was a wave of hype behind Tuivasa. He was this next Mark Hunt, if you will, with a winning record. And now he's on a 3-fight losing streak. So these guys are fighting for their careers at this point. I don't think that's a stretch to say it. It's a tough one to try and predict because for Stefan Struve, you can see it up there. I'm not going to dance around it. He's not 6'11 and a half. I'll pull a tape out someday, but I've got 7 feet up there. For Tai Tuivasa, 6'2". I mean, the reach and the height are always going to be in the corner of Struve. It's a tough fight for him against Tai Tuivasa. It's not easy. Struve is blessed with these gifts that he just doesn't use. His distance management's never really been a successful thing with him. And for Tai Tuivasa, I go back to the fight that he had against Junior Dos Santos where I thought, hey, man, like, you have some opportunities. He's slipping. but JDS lets him get up. Like, he made mistakes in that fight. JDS let him kind of, all right, well, waltz around it, really, because it was just a dance. And then he goes out against Blagoy, and it's a bad performance. And then he goes out against Spivak, who's unranked, and it's not a good performance. Now, it's hard to look good against Blagoy even.
I'm going to disagree. I didn't even think he looked bad. I thought he won that fight. This is my problem in this fight. Both guys possess the kryptonite to their opponents. Because Tuivasa, what's he bad at? Well, just laying... He doesn't have the Derek Lewis just get up. Because Derek Lewis, he'll get himself into these bad positions, and you'll think he's tired, like Tai Tuivasa, and he'll be on his back, like Tai Tuivasa, and you're like, oh, wow, what's going to happen? But Derek Lewis just finds a way to get up. Whereas Tai Tuivasa, from what we've seen of his grappling, it's not all that high level, and I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. The Jojua Santos fight, I think, is a very good fight to bring up, because you look at what Tuivasa was able to do for the first part of that fight. He was landing the calf kick. He was really giving Dos Santos a lot of problems with his speed. And then the second JDS figured out what he was doing, he timed a calf kick, hit him with a two-punch combo, got into full mount, and just completely beat the brakes off him. Now, in the Blagoy-Ivanov fight, yes, it's hard to look good against Blagoy. He did drop Blagoy. Blagoy also dropped him, one of the few entertaining Blagoy-Ivanov fights, but it was very back and forth, and I thought even if Tuivasa loses this one, it was a decent performance. The Spivak fight was awful, though, and it was a fight that I thought, okay, if you lose to Jojua Santos, no shame in that, former champion, probably a learning experience. Then you lose against Blagoy-Ivanov, but it was a fairly close fight, no big deal. Then you go out and fight Sergey Spivak, and I was like, okay, if he's going to win one, this is the one to win. Spivak took him down and beat the... Like, it wasn't even close. It was like Khabib, Edson Barbosa-esque, and then he was able to get the submission.
It was like Sergey Spivak, Carlos Felipe.
Yeah, exactly. And for Tai Tuivasa, he has to do whatever he can to avoid the ground game Stefan Struve in this fight. Because Stefan Struve's best submission is the one that we've seen Tai Tuivasa get submitted by. It's that head and arm choke. Struve, he's got those long limbs. He's got really good pressure, top pressure. And if you are a guy like Tai Tuivasa, your cardio is not phenomenal, but you do have those really good leg kicks. And that's kind of the kryptonite of Stefan Struve. What's Stefan Struve not great at? Well, he's really good at backing up against the cage, something that Jojua Santos also does. And if you can just whip those calf kicks in, come in with those big overhand shots, it's not ridiculous to think Tai Tuivasa could knock out Stefan Struve fairly early in this fight. It's not... First of all, I'll let this be known. I would never pick either one of these guys if they were fighting someone else. I think matchmaking-wise, these guys are both at about the same level, and it is what you had said. The loser of this... Like, you do have to kind of worry about your UFC job at a certain point. Tai Tuivasa already been cut. Stefan Struve, after the Marcos Rogerio de Lima fight, was talking about retirement. And he was retired up until he took the Ben Rothwell fight. Looking okay against Ben Rothwell is one thing, too. Because Ben Rothwell, you know he's going to come with a lot of the volume. He's going to come with a lot of pressure. But the power's not really there behind his shots. So Stefan Struve can keep his back off the cage, really use his jab, and start checking leg kicks. I think he can have success in this fight. But if Tuivasa can start landing those leg kicks, really limit the movement of Stefan Struve, I don't know how Struve's going to get it down to the ground.
To me, the X factor is the ground game. One guy has it, one guy doesn't, and if it gets there at all, it's Stefan Struve's playground on the ground. And I look at this... I know, but I look at this, you look at Tapology in terms of the total votes. Limited sample size, we're doing this early. 439 votes, 55% going Struve. The win rate on that, 58% predicting he wins by submission. For Tuivasa, 45%, 84% of those voters pick him to win by knockout. If we have a look at the odds over on Best Fight Odds, it's close. I mean, Struve opened a minus 130. Some money came in on him quick, then it bounced back up. He's about a minus 128 average. For Tai Tuivasa, open plus 100. He's a plus 104 at this point. So the odds are really close. It's almost a pick'em. I've got Stefan Struve in this pick'em type of atmosphere. It's not the most confident pick on the card, 100%, because you have very inconsistent fighters. One guy in a 3-fight losing streak. One guy's 1-4 in his last 5. Did I love what I saw at Struve in his last fight? Not necessarily. I mean, he got finished by Ben Rothwell, which you said. I mean, Rothwell's not known for his power and fury. Look at his last fight against Marcin Tybura as an example. But for Struve, I like the ground game for sure. And I think if Tai Tuivasa if he slips, if he makes a mistake, if he gets on the ground, he's in grave danger against Stefan Struve. You can rarely say that, but I think in that case he is. So I'm ever so slightly edging Stefan Struve, though most of my case has been made for Stefan Struve.
So Marcos Rogerio de Lima dropped Stefan Struve with the first punch he threw in that fight. And all he did was back him up, get him up against the cage, throw a big looping overhand shot. What is all that Tai Tuivasa does in every single one of his fights? Backs people up against the cage, throws a big looping shot. I think Tuivasa just has one of those uncomfortable styles for a guy like Stefan Struve. He stands very straight up, and I do think one of those shots eventually will be able to clip his chin. I said I'd never do it again, but I'm picking Tai Tuivasa for the win.
Matt, never going to do it again. Matt's going Tuivasa. I'm going with Stefan Struve. This is an inconsistent type of pick for guys that are normally somewhat consistent. I'm enjoying it. I mean, we've got a great main event. You got Justin Gaethje taking on Khabib Nurmagomedov. You're not going to want to miss that. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it. Really looking forward to a fight that's in its fourth booking in as many times. We have Magomed Ankalaev supposed to be taking on Ion Cutelaba. 4 times been rebooked. This is the rematch. Isn't that crazy to say? Matt, we've redone and redone this fight prediction multiple times, and my thoughts have not changed at all. So we're going to throw it back to our original prediction, and then we're going to update it with the new odds and new Tapology picks. This first fight ended in controversy. It's nothing like your Stipe Miocic, Daniel Cormier trilogy to a lesser extent, or even the sequel, but we get a sequel light heavyweight between these two primary strikers. Magomed Ankalaev so far in the UFC's looked great. He looked great in that Paul Craig fight until the last second when he got submitted, but apart from that, he's looked great. He beat the EFC or former EFC champ, Dalcha Lujanbula with a front kick.
That was insane.
If you want to go back through Marcin Prachinio, big knockout win there. Beats the former Brave champ.
Look good against the Brave.
Clidson Abreu, you have to worry about the submission ability there. And then he had the crazy fight against Ion Cutelaba. And if you look at Cutelaba in his last 5 fights, we go back 3 years when he fought Luis Enrique and did that and all the stunting, and then he knocks him out absolutely cold. So you think there's a super high ceiling on this guy, and he's still only 26 years old, almost 27. He knocks out Gaethje at Antigua, but Paul Craig dummied him there.
Exactly.
And then he fought Glover Teixeira. Way too high up. You can't go from beating Gaethje at Antigua to Glover Teixeira. So that was weird. Then he fights Khalil Roundtree, and that was Bangkok ready Khalil. And then he finished him. So then he fights Ankalaev and plays rope-a-dope and loses a game against Kevin McDonald. So now we get this rematch. What do you make of it?
So it's an interesting rematch because I don't really think we need to see it. I understand there was a little bit of controversy. We were talking about 2 unranked light heavyweights in a division that, you know, we kind of need parity at the top of this division. Everyone's 36 or above, it seems, who it really is. You have new guys like Yuri Prochazka. He's kind of the new blood right now after what he did to Uzumir. You have Thiago Santos, but he's kind of had a shot. He's been out for a long time.
You get the Rakic's. There are some new guys.
There's some new guys starting to move up, but that division's moving like molasses. I know the whole pandemic doesn't really help its case very much, but it would be nice to see these 2 guys matched up with other people moving forward. And I get it. Cutelaba was kind of playing that rope-a-dope game. Ankalaev had him hurt, though. You don't just start doing that because you think, hey, this is a great game plan in this fight. He gets clipped behind the ear. Cutelaba's kind of wobbly, and then you kind of realize, okay, he's recovered from the initial shot that did hurt him, but he is going to try to keep on playing this game. Ankalaev was still teeing off on him that whole time. If your best bet to win a fight is, let me pretend to be hurt, and hopefully he walks into a big overhand right, you probably need a new coach if that really is your game plan, because that's never your best way to get to a victory. It's the same thing. It was my problem when TJ was complaining after he lost to Henry Cejudo. You shot for a single leg against an Olympic gold medalist. It's not like that was, that wasn't the game plan going into that fight. So, of course, you weren't in the right state of mind. And with Cutelaba, he's a guy who's very hittable, and they always bill him as this very credentialed wrestler from Moldova. Jared Cannonier was able to take him down at light heavyweight, which is a very odd fact, because Jared Cannonier, much more known for his striking. And I understand he was a heavyweight moving down to light heavyweight for that fight, and it was fight of the night, it was close, it was competitive. But Cutelaba, if he doesn't get that KO, I don't really know how he beats you. He's in that Walt Harris category for me right now, where Walt Harris, if he's going to win a fight, I can tell you exactly how.
Matt, people are really not high on your Walt Harris analysis, saying that Derek Lewis has better striking than Walt Harris. But I digress.
That's fine.
Walt Harris, to me, is a really explosive striker, and he's a really crisp striker. The trouble is, once the fight goes on, it's less about Walt Harris and more about his opponent.
Oh, I didn't even have anything to do with that. It's just, if Walt Harris is in a fight, I know how he's going to win. He's either going to win by a knockout in the first round or the early part of the second round, and if not, he's probably going to get tired and lose the decision. With Cutelaba, he's kind of falling into that same category for me, where, yes, I really do enjoy the whole when he wore the Bret the Hitman Hart glasses and he walked out in Calgary. Like, he's a fun character outside of the cage, but when you really look at his talent, I don't really see him being the next, and I hate to use the term Johnny Walker, because Walker did have such a quick ascent and then such a big demise, but he's starting to fall into that category for me, mainly because he's just, you always hear about the things that he can do, and you always hear about the excitement that he can bring, but then when you watch him fight, he gets tired pretty quick. He's not the best wrestler. He's not the most technical guy. He's like if Paulo Costa didn't have that same kind of cardio and explosiveness and like all the good things to make Paulo Costa, Cutelaba has his power and a little bit of his hand speed, but he's really only got that for like 3 rounds. And Ankalaev, when we do see him in those long extended fights, now I understand the Paul Craig fight, it's kind of the oddity on his record, but when you look at what he's able to do, if the fight stays standing, Ankalaev has a far more diverse array of strikes that he can choose from. He's the much better striker out of the two. Cutelaba probably hits harder, but Ankalaev, he can mix up with the kicks, the takedowns, the wrestling. He's very much more a martial artist, whereas Cutelaba is more of just a knockout artist.
And it's one of those ones where it gets really interesting because it's just like, it's sad that this is going to happen, but Roy Jones Jr. and Mike Tyson, because Mike Tyson, you got to worry about the knockout, and I think Mike Tyson is going to be an overwhelming favorite in that boxing exhibition. But it's similar to the end of Mike Tyson's career where he was losing, but everybody said, oh, well, just wait. He's got that knockout power. You watch out for it. It's like that with Cutelaba. You always have to watch out for that overhand right, that knockout power. The troubling thing for me is he couldn't really figure out the cardio, so he sought outside sources and then ended up with a USADA suspension.
Yeah.
That's an issue, and I get it.
You
can sleep in a hyperbaric chamber. It can kind of change the whole chemistry with your blood. So, and maybe that's what he did. I don't know what he did, but he still accepted a 6-month suspension, which isn't much of a suspension, but I digress. Magomed Ankalaev, to me, it's a conversation that we have all the time when we have strikers facing strikers, and we have to break them down for what they're worth, and it could become a fight night picks type of thing, but it's technique versus those long looping shots, and it's one of those ones where Ion Cutelaba, long looping shots, power heavy, but that bar is going to try to drain, or it will drain quickly. Magomed Ankalaev, he's going to carry it, he's going to get on his bike, you know exactly what he's going to do, and if somebody sinks a nasty choke with a second left in a fight, he might just lose it. But it's one of those ones where, yeah, I would agree with you the way that we're trending to Ankalaev. All right, Matt, so let's bring it back for the updated odds, and odds makers have this overwhelmingly in the favor of Russia's Magomed Ankalaev. He opened a minus 340 favorite, now sitting around a minus 280. I've seen the comments come in again and again and again. A lot of people in favor of Ion Cutelaba getting the win. Open to plus 260. Underdog, he's now the plus 224. And Matt, if we have a look at the total picks, I mean, again, we've seen a lot of support for Cutelaba. If he's going to get a win, you'd think it would have to come early. Well, out of 471 total picks on Tapology, 80% going Ankalaev, 78% saying he's going to get the win by knockout, 20% picking Cutelaba, 87% saying he's going to get the win by knockout. Again, we don't really see much changing, so that kind of tips our hand a little bit. I just think we saw Magomed Ankalaev. Now, did all the shots land? Did he really knock him out? I really don't care, because if he didn't, well, he was en route to doing it. And for Ion Cutelaba, the gas tank's always a question mark for me, and it still is in this one. So I'm going to side with the Russian in Magomed Ankalaev. Do you have any following thoughts here?
Not really. It's wild that the UFC is more dedicated to making this fight happen than they are to make Tony Ferguson versus Khabib Nurmagomedov, because it's fallen out just as many times, it seems. But no, I think Ankalaev's got this one. He's proven that he is the more skilled out of the two, and let's be honest, he won that first fight. So it is weird that they've really wanted to give us this rematch that 5 people have been asking for, but I think it will be an entertaining fight for as long as it lasts, but I do have Ankalaev.
Matt, I know people are going to disagree in the comments, but we're still going with Magomed Ankalaev to get the win. It's a great card, headlined by a great fight. Khabib Nurmagomedov taking on Justin Gaethje. So you're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. Really interesting fight at women's flyweight, and it would have been even more so if we had the originally scheduled bout between Lucky Lauren Murphy and Cynthia Calvillo, and it would be hard to argue that that fight may have produced a title contender. I mean, Cynthia Calvillo in her flyweight debut put on an absolute statement with a big win over Jessica Ai, and I thought automatically title shot, but not so. So we were originally supposed to get Murphy and Calvillo. Calvillo out, so now we get a relative unknown in Liliya Shakirova, unless you know women's flyweight. Now, fighter from Uzbekistan, a nation that we don't see overly represented in some of the higher levels of MMA, but Liliya Shakirova, a great record. She's fought previously with Guerrilla Fight Championships and Fight Nights Global, and a fighter that actually had quite a bit of buzz around her. There was an opportunity maybe this summer. Will she sign with Bellator? Will she sign with the UFC? Well, she gets a short notice call with the UFC against a really tough out in Lauren Murphy. And Matt, we don't have odds out on this fight, but I anticipate Lauren Murphy's going to be an overwhelming favorite in this one. Liliya Shakirova in her last time out, a win over Egul Kuza Abdulvakad. I tried. And in that fight, I mean, at the time her opponent was 1-1. She's now 1-3. But Shakirova looked great in that fight. So then we went back and watched some of her other contests. The one against Yulia Borisova with Fight Nights Global a couple of years ago. You get a better idea of what kind of strengths Liliya Shakirova possesses. And this is a fighter that's coming out of a decent gym. I mean, she spent time training at Buka Gym with Zubair Tukhugov and Shalga Shumagulov. And I mean, you know that she's a freestyle wrestling national champ, and she won that flyweight championship with GFC. What that means, not a whole lot, because the level of competition wasn't that great. But national wrestling champion, she can tie into that. And actually, we talked about Umar Nurmagomedov earlier on the card, the fact that he has good wrestling, his striking's half decent. Liliya Shakirova, she's fine with throwing some spinning kicks. She's fine with setting things up with her hand. She is a well-rounded fighter. I just think it's too big of a step up in her debut to take on somebody like Lauren Murphy. Now, could she absolutely wow us and put on a statement win? Of course she could. I mean, this is a good stage and a good opportunity for her. Look what Calvillo did with I. Upsets happen all the time. This is a great opportunity. I'm really looking forward to this fight. It's just a big ask in your debut.
It is, and I'm in the same boat as you. I'm really upset that we aren't getting the title eliminator that we were promised, because Lauren Murphy versus Cynthia Calvillo, whether or not you think that either one of them have a shot against Valentina, it doesn't really matter. Just as a fight in itself, I think that was a very interesting contest, but for Shakirova, it's going to be interesting to see how she deals with not only the experience, but also the size and the strength of Lauren Murphy. Because Lauren Murphy, a lot of people forget, she had her first run in the UFC at 135 before there even was a 125 division, before there was even a 130 or 115 division.
That's former Invicta bantamweight champ.
Exactly. So Lauren Murphy's been around, she's done it, and she really is one of the pioneers of women's MMA, one of the early Invicta fighters. And on this recent run that she's had in flyweight, she's looked really good. In the Roxanne Modafferi fight, I thought Roxanne was going to cause her a lot of troubles, but I actually thought she looked as good in that fight as she has in any fight, and she really showed that all of her MMA skill set is kind of starting to come together. She will mix in the wrestling with her striking. She has a very frustrating style of striking because no, she's not going to go out there and hit you with one punch Francis Ngannou style, or she might not overwhelm you with volume like a Diaz brother or like Max Holloway, but she's just really frustrating in that she's always on you, and she really takes a lot of the air out of the room, because no matter what you do, Lauren Murphy's going to be in your face. And for Shakirova, I don't think her wrestling's good enough to just go out there and dominate Lauren Murphy to get her to the ground, because the size and the strength of Lauren Murphy is... she's big enough that I think it is going to cause troubles for Shakirova. And also, on the feet, Shakirova does have quite a few kicks, and she does have that nice sort of Taekwondo-esque front kicks and spinning kicks like you had mentioned. But those aren't kicks that have a lot of pop behind them. Those aren't the most damaging shots. And I don't think you're going to land a front kick to knock out Lauren Murphy in a UFC fight. I think the experience is on Murphy's side. I think the level of competition is on Murphy's side. I think she's been able to fight at the highest level, and she's been able to get really good wins in the UFC. I just think Lauren Murphy, again, we're talking about her like she should be in those, top 3 matchups, top 5 matchups in her weight class, and currently she's welcoming a fighter into the UFC. So I think Lauren Murphy has fought better fighters than Shakirova, and I think she's beat better fighters than Shakirova.
Now, well. I mean, the 2 losses that Lauren Murphy has on her record that you kind of worry about. I mean, the Sajara Eubanks loss and a loss to Nico Montano as well. So keep that in mind. And if Liliya Shakirova is going to get a win, it has to be a lot of pressure, a lot of volume, and a lot of wrestling. And we saw it, and as I pronounce wrestling oddly, we saw it. If you want a fight to kind of measure up against, and this is going to be really weird, but it's a fight that we just watched because it happened just last week, Mateusz Gamrot Guram Cutelaba. And we had seen with Mateusz Gamrot with KSW, he had a lot of success with the power and the volume, but mostly the volume, the stance switches, this and that. In the fight against Cutelaba, it didn't really come together until the 3rd round. But if Liliya Shakirova is going to have an ounce of a shot to win in this fight like 3rd round Mateusz Gamrot did, because it was a lot of pressure, a lot of volume, and just rinse and repeat with takedowns. And if they don't work for you, just keep going with the pressure. Is that sustainable? No. So for Liliya Shakirova, it's a slim margin for her to get a win. There's definitely an opportunity out there. We don't have Topology picks out there. We don't have odds on this fight either, because it's just come out as we tape on Saturday, really early on these ones. So I'm going to side with what I know in Lauren Murphy. I really do like the upside with Liliya Shakirova. And if she gets a huge statement win, boy, is that flyweight division absolutely wide open. So I'm going to side slightly with Lauren Murphy.
So am I. But again, we saw the last woman who's supposed to fight for the title in Joanne Calderwood. She was lined up for a title shot, ended up losing to Jennifer Maia, and now she's barely even in the top 5. So this division, it's so wide open that 1 or 2 big wins can basically put you in a title shot. It's kind of crazy, but I do have Lauren Murphy.
Really looking forward to it, though. The short notice debut from Uzbekistan's Liliya Shakirova. I'm going with Murphy. Matt's going with Murphy. You're not going to want to miss the rest of the picks for this card. We got a great main event event title unification bout between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Justin Gaethje. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it. Really excited for our next fight, and a couple of question marks. We've got Megatron Phil Hawes coming in off a wild knockout win from Dana White's Contender Series this past summer. And I mean, really looking good because we hadn't seen him on the Contender Series stage in a while, and his first time up, it wasn't a good look. Now we got Megatron taking on the Mamba, Jacob Malkoun. And Matt, a lot of question marks because for Jacob Malkoun, you can see it in the record 4-0. He's a main training partner of Robert Whittaker. He's been a mainstay there since 2015. Purple belt ADCC champ back a year ago on the trial scene over in Australia. And a guy that, you know, he's 4-0. He's 3-0 in boxing. Very well-rounded we've seen so far. And it's great to have those credentials in grappling. Now he's coming in against Sanford MMA's Phil Hawes. And this is a guy that's day in, day out training with some of the best martial artists in the world. I mean, the Michael Chandlers. We're talking Kamaru Usman. We're talking Gilbert Burns. The list goes on and on and on. Out of the training partners that Phil Hawes has had. And we know too that he has good wrestling in his back pocket. The leg kicks are great and the power is amazing. As long as he doesn't gas himself out early, he's got a good shot against some really good competition. For Malkoun, we've seen it in his fights. He is well-rounded. He will accept the fight and get moving and get going. There's just so many question marks, really.
Yeah, this, against Phil Hawes, not really a guy who you want to be moving and throwing down with just in the middle of the cage. With Jacob Malkoun, too, it's never a great sign, and I'm going to use an NBA draft analogy. The sooner they mention their personality, the worse the player is going to be. Now, with Malkoun, I just hate the fact that every time you try to look up footage or anything, the first thing is, well, he trains with Robert Whittaker. And that's great. I'm sure training with a guy of Whittaker's caliber, you probably learn a ton every single day. Phil Hawes, like you had mentioned, trains with some of the best fighters in the world. Guys like Kamaru Usman, guys like Luke Rockhold. Having Henry Hooked as a coach, like, I don't think just having your training partners being really good is always going to rub off on you.
Now,
but at least Phil Hawes has a wide stable of fighters that he can train with in and out daily. And you do have different looks too. And that's what I really like about Hard Knocks or Sanford MMA now. Because guys like Usman, you can train your wrestling with. Burns, your jiu-jitsu. Chandler, your wrestling, or your striking and your wrestling. Like, there's so many guys at that gym who excel at so many different areas of MMA that every single day you train with a different person and really just kind of learn a whole new skill set. Where with Jacob Malkoun, from what you've seen in his fights, like you had mentioned, he is well-rounded. He's not afraid to kind of play the guard game, but he is a guy who, with only 4 professional fights, there's only so much learning and experience that you can make up in that time. And when you do kind of look through, he's had a hard time getting fights. There's been a lot of them that have dropped out. And when you are kind of one of the better guys of the regional scene, that is a problem. A lot of guys have it. But Phil Hawes, like, again, at least we know what we're going to get with him. He's been on the Contender Series a few times. Yes, he lost Julian Marquez in one of those, but again, the Cuban Missile Crisis, one of the guys who really coming out of the first season of Contender Series, you thought he was going to be the poster boy for the show.
Got a pretty big MMA podcast these days, too, with Kendra Lust.
There you go. And he had a really big push from the UFC, but it just really hasn't turned out all that great for him. But Phil Hawes, ever since then, has put together 4 really great finishes.
And I mean, look at the losses on Phil Hawes' record. Let's pick it apart. You got Julian Marquez, he loses by finish. He submitted with World Series against Lewis Taylor. Lewis Taylor's a PFL millionaire from the first season. Exactly. I mean, it wasn't likely that he went that far, but he did, and a great guy at a Rufus Sport. And then Andrew Alderte Sanchez, well, he went on to win that season of The Ultimate Fighter, season 23. So Phil Hawes has taken on some pretty good competition. Those are losses, but still, 4-fight win streak, all 4 of them by finish against a mixed bag, but still, they all count. And for Jacob Malkoun, 4-0, I get it. And then you look at how spread out the fights are, because his first fight was at 21 years old, Brace 47, a Hex Fight Series win over Ryan Hedeka, who was 5-4 at the time. Christoph Van Dijk's actually a good win on his record, his second to last fight. And then against Sebastian Temesi at Eternal MMA 48 this time last year. It's a decent win. I mean, Hex Series and Eternal MMA, you see a lot of good fighters coming out of there, I will admit. But overall, too many question marks for me, so it is a tough one overall. If you look over on Tapology at a 404 total votes, error. Hawes, 91% of the votes, 83% see him getting the win by knockout. And if we look at the odds, Hawes, a pretty big favorite, open to minus 340. The line jumped up actually on Malkoun, so you got Hawes at a minus 275, opposite Malkoun a plus 220. I feel fairly confident picking Phil Hawes, unless Jacob Malkoun goes in there, grabs a leg, and submits him. I don't see that happening. So for Phil Hawes, should be a decent win. I'm really looking forward to the fight, and I think that this guy, with a couple of good performances, could be really on the radar at middleweight.
Okay, I'm not going to go that far. I think Phil Hawes is going to be able to get this done. I think the leg kicks and the power will eventually get to Malkoun. I'm not going to say he's going to be in the top 15 by the end of the year or anything, but I do think Phil Hawes is the higher ceiling out of the two. And I think he's probably going to be able to done even by stoppage this weekend.
Really looking forward to this fight. We both have Phil Hawes to get the win. I mean, hey, it's a great card. In our main event, title unification bout of Justin Gaethje taking on Khabib Nurmagomedov. So you're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. And as we always say, let's get into it. Really interesting fight at heavyweight. We have two of the bigger guys in the division in former Bellator and M1 Global heavyweight champ Alexander Drago Volkov taking on Walt, the big ticket Harris. This is a really interesting fight because both guys have succinct finishing power. I mean, you got the hand speed of Volkov, and you look at the fight, you want a marquee Alexander Volkov fight, go back and watch his fight against Fabrizio Verdum if you want a good taste of what he can do. For Walt Harris, the Spivak win, the Alexei Oleinik win, you're beating good grapplers. And I mean, his last time out, it definitely didn't go his way. A headlining spot that the UFC booked and rebooked again against Alistair Overeem. But for Volkov, his last time out against Curtis Blaydes in a main event definitely didn't go his way. And I know, Matt, you had a different view than most people did. And I'm going to disagree with you, and I'll let you get into it. But I thought that Blaydes, I mean, he took that fight overwhelmingly. It was one of those ones where it was a statement by Blaydes. And can you deny him a title shot? Well, he's been finished twice by Ngannou, so yes, you can. But Blaydes is one of those guys that if there was no Francis Ngannou, that guy would be top dog. And I mean, you can disagree with me there. I don't care if you want to. But this fight here, Alexander Volkov, Walt Harris, two primary strikers. One guy's been to the top of the hill with M1. I mean, think of their former heavyweight champ, Marcin Tybura, just lighting the world on fire. But former Bellator champ, took on really tough competition there. They both struggle against wrestlers, we know that. So at least we're getting a powerful matchup here. 6'7 versus 6'5, 88 inches of reach versus 77 inches of reach. This should be a really good one. I definitely expect a finish. How do you see this one?
So I am really excited for this fight. And just to clear up, so Alexander Volkov in his last fight against Curtis Blaydes, yes, he lost every single round. But did Curtis Blaydes show he was the better MMA fighter than Alexander Volkov, or did he show that he was the best wrestler throughout 5 rounds? And I know that's not a great argument to make, but Alexander Volkov in that fight, especially near the end of that fight, you can facepalm as much as you want, but everything I'm saying is right. By the end of that fight, he was starting to land on Curtis Blaydes, and he was starting to make Curtis Blaydes pay for the entries. Now, again, against most wrestlers at this division, you're not going to have to withstand that kind of an onslaught of wrestling, because Curtis Blaydes, we know what he's going to do. He's going to take you down, and normally, again, the Overeem fight's a great example. He has really good ground and pound, but in a 5-round fight, I think that fight showed that Blaydes doesn't deserve a title fight more than it showed that he was so dominant in that fight. Because after that fight, what were we talking about? We were talking about how Curtis Blaydes almost passed out because he was so tired. And we talked about how maybe his wrestling's not as good as we thought. And maybe his cardio's not as good as we thought. After that fight, I thought less of Curtis Blaydes. That's all I'm going to say.
Shut up.
I really don't care. So, Walt Harris in his fight, yes, he had really good moments against Alistair Overeem, but the second the fight hit the mat, he wasn't really able to offer much up. With Volkov, when the fight hits the ground, if he's on his back, he is able to get back up to his feet a lot of the time. Again, against those higher level wrestlers, he's going to have trouble against. But for the most part, Volkov, if he gets taken down, will be able to get back up to his feet. With Walt Harris, that's the one thing that concerns me. His ability to get back up to his feet isn't great. Now, I don't expect this fight to be on the ground for that long of time. But what this fight comes down to, can Walt Harris close the distance on Alexander Volkov? It's one of those weird tests that a lot of heavyweights have to get by. It's, can I beat Stefan Struve, Travis Brown, or Alexander Volkov? Now, yes, all three of those guys are kind of different stages in the rankings. Some not even fighting anymore. But you always have to fight that one really tall, rangy guy who gives you a lot of trouble with the jab and the leg kick. And Alexander Volkov is kind of that at its highest level. The power for Walt Harris is always going to be there, but the stat that they used to always say was Walt Harris, all of his fights are done in the first round, or all of his wins are first round finishes. That's never a stat that you really want to hear, especially against a guy like Volkov, who isn't the traditional heavyweight in a sense where he's going to go out there like a Jairzinho Rosenstrike and try to knock you out in the first round. Alexander Volkov is one of the more measured heavyweights, and he will kind of wait behind the jab, let you make mistakes, and then try to capitalize on as the fight continues.
That's the thing. I mean, with Walt Harris, we look at the last 5, a win over Daniel Spitz, a split draw against Andrei Arlovsky, the win over Spivak, the win over Oleinik, and then he loses to Overeem. The level of competition is all over the place. I mean, Daniel Spitz isn't an upper-level heavyweight whatsoever. For Andrei Arlovsky, still hanging in there and having competitive fights, so that one's fine. Spivak on the lower end, but with some upside. And then Alexei Oleinik is, old man time, and he just continues to define it and turn it back. For Alexander Volkov, out of the last 5, it's top competition. Struve, Verdum, and he beats him, loses to Lewis, beats Greg Hardy, which was a weird, under the circumstance type of fight, and then he loses to Curtis Blaydes. So, if we look at the total Tapology votes, Matt, out of 547, 70% going Volkov, 64% saying he's going to win by decision. If we look at the odds, Volkov slightly favored, open to -175. A lot of money came in on him. Now it's coming in on Harris. He's a -180 favorite with Walt Harris, open to +145. Now to +149 average on best fight odds. So there's definitely upside for both guys. It's just you're going from Alistair Overeem to Alexander Volkov for Walt Harris. It's kind of like almost a lateral move. And for Volkov, you're going from Curtis Blaydes to Walt Harris. So for Walt Harris,
I think you're going to
it's tough.
Volkov, though. I do think Overeem's quite a bit better than Alexander Volkov because he grapples at least. Alexander Volkov's not going to shoot a takedown. With Walt Harris, after he was able to hurt Overeem, Overeem was able to recover and then use his grappling. If he hurts Volkov, Volkov can't just go into his back pocket and start grappling Walt Harris. So that's something that if Walt Harris does get off to one of these crazy good starts, because he does come with a big storm. And it does remind me of an early Rumble Johnson where Rumble, especially kind of when he was coming back to 205, it was okay. If you can withstand that storm, you can get past it. Daniel Cormier showed it. Again, he's pretty much the only guy who could. But if you can get past that first flurry, you're going to have success. With Walt Harris, he'll throw a flurry, and then he'll kind of wait and recharge. And he'll throw a flurry and wait and recharge. Not really at the level of like Yoel Romero kind of does this, where he's either only in offensive mode or only in defensive mode. Walt Harris is a similar game. I just don't know how he closed the distance on a guy like Volkov, because his wrestling's not phenomenal, so I don't see him jumping in on the legs. I don't really see him out-clinching Volkov, because Volkov's got really good knees in the clinch. And the thing, too, the height advantage of Alexander Volkov is going to play a big factor, because for Walt Harris to have success, he's going to have to close the distance. If you close the distance on Volkov, he's going to get you in a tie clinch, he's going to throw those great elbows, he's going to bring knees up the middle. A lot of the ways and areas that Walt Harris can have success are actually going to play into the offense of Alexander Volkov, and that's why I'm picking Volkov.
And for Volkov, you want to further your argument there, striking differential, it's at a +2 rate in terms of strikes landed per minute, 4.65 to 2.53. For Walt Harris, it's in a negative 2.97 to 3.18. Striking accuracy, 58% for Volkov. And we have, big enough sample size for both these guys that you can take that into account. 39% for Harris. Our striking defense, roughly the same, 54% Volkov, 56% Harris. And then the grappling stats, relatively negligible, but the takedown accuracy for Volkov, 70% to Walt Harris is 33%. Decent takedown defense from either guy, 72% for Harris is better than 65% for Volkov, but you're splitting hairs at a certain point because you don't expect the fight to go to the mat there. I also like the weird front kick or the push kick that Volkov will throw as well. And I have Volkov in this fight. Superior striking, in general, over the length of 15 minutes, superior striking, but like you said, there's an early storm from Harris. He's a southpaw. It's a different look that you don't get every day in the gym. So for Walt Harris, there's definitely an opportunity, but I do see this fight for Alexander Volkov.
So the way I see it is Alexander Volkov's at the lower end of what I consider the elite heavyweights. If you can beat Alexander Volkov, I put you in that top 5 category. But when I say top 5, there could be 7 guys in there sometimes. There could be 4 sometimes. I just mean you are kind of in the elite of the elite if you can beat a guy like Volkov. So if Walt Harris can beat Volkov, he is sort of making that jump back to where he was before the Overeem fight. But I don't think he has the cardio edge over Volkov. I don't think he has the wrestling edge. I do think he has the power, but other than that, that's it. So
that's it. Heavyweight MMA, either guy lands. You can put the other guy's lights out. We'll both go with Alexander Volkov, but it is a great fight. Make sure you check out the rest of predictions for the card. A great main event and a great co-main event. You got Whittaker, Cannonier. You got Nurmagomedov and Gaethje. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say, let's get into it. Really interesting fight with possible title implications on the line. We have the Reaper Robert Whittaker taking on the Killer Gorilla Jared Cannonier. And Matt, what a ride it's been for Jared Cannonier in his last 3 fights. Huge wins after coming off of 2 losses in a row to your recent light heavyweight title challengers. You had Jan Blachowicz and then Dominic Reyes. So he loses both of those fights. Then he takes on David Branch, knocks him out. Then he has the, Anderson Silva breaks his leg fight. Then he fought Jack Hermanson. And for me, that was such a statement win to beat Jack Hermanson. Jack Hermanson is and this is going to come off so bad, but he's a jack of all trades. And Hermanson, really unorthodox striker, really slippery on the ground. You saw that in his last fight. Huge win for Jack Hermanson. For Jared Cannonier, it's dynamite in his hands, and it's so weird. And we compare Jared Cannonier and Justin Ledet all the time, because Ledet went from heavyweight to light heavyweight and he was bad. Jared Cannonier went from heavyweight where he was good to light heavyweight where he wasn't great, but he was fighting the best competition.
He wasn't great at heavyweight either.
And then to middleweight where it's like, holy smokes, career revival. The guy's 36 years old, but he's looked absolutely amazing. For Robert Whittaker, former middleweight champ, and this is a guy that did the opposite, moves up from 70 to 85 and finds tons of success. But I mean, he's been in some wars. The Yoel Romero fights were insane. The Israel Adesanya fight, the fight against Darren Till. And maybe you weren't a big fan of the fight against Darren Till. And maybe I wasn't a big fan of the fight against Darren Till. But it was a good fight. It really was an interesting fight. At the top of the division, it was one of those ones where, where's Robert Whittaker at now? But also, where's Darren Till at? And it was competitive. Whittaker gets the win. Does Darren Till fight Khamzat Chimaev his next time out? No. I mean, he's going to fight Jack Hermanson. But Darren Till's still there. And for Robert Whittaker, it was one of those ones where it was a close fight. I mean, at the start, it went how it went. By the end, it went how it went. And I'll let you get into that more so than I will. But in this one, stylistically, if you put this fight together maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, everybody, I think, would say Robert Whittaker would win. Everybody would say that. But at this point in time, Jared Cannonier's the favorite. And that just has to seem weird as an MMA fan.
It does, because Jared Cannonier is a guy who a lot of people remember as the guy who got knocked out by Dominic Reyes, as the guy who got beat up by Jan Blachowicz. But ever since he has moved down to 185, I do think that first fight against David Branch was really important, because in the David Branch fight, you saw that David Branch, if he couldn't get that takedown on the feet, you're like, oh wow, Jared Cannonier's a bit of a problem. And then you could tell that as that fight was going on, David Branch himself kind of realized that, and he was just like, panic takedown, until the point where Jared Cannonier shucks him off, hits him with one punch, drops him, and then just beats him up on the ground. And yes, David Branch isn't really the cream of the crop in the middleweight division, but at least at the time, he was a phenomenal wrestler, and you thought that a guy like that would give Jared Cannonier a lot of problems. But Cannonier, he showed that, okay, I have crazy power on the feet, I have really good stand-up, and I can defend takedowns from a high-level guy. And that really matters when you're moving down to a weight class, or just really at any point in your career. It's pretty important to stuff takedowns, but it showed that you can do that against the highest level. The Anderson Silva fight, not even really worth talking about, just because it was that weird, like, kick. I don't know if Silva got injured or whatever happened, but he went down, it was fairly quick. Can't really talk about that. And then the Jack Hermanson fight, me too. I thought Jack Hermanson was... He might not be your champ, but I really thought that Jack Hermanson was he was on one of those dark horse win streaks where you're like, oh, darn, like, wow, Jack Hermanson, sneaky good. But then Jared Cannonier, it was the same thing. He was able to defend the takedowns, and at a certain point, Jack Hermanson was like, what do I do now? Because I really can't play the volume game with him, because I'm going to stand there for a little bit too long, can get hit with something, and I can't take him down, which is really my, bread and butter, is the submission game. Jared Cannonier, of course, knocks him out with an uppercut. Robert Whittaker is going to be by far the best fighter Jared Cannonier has ever fought, because Robert Whittaker is one of the best fighters really ever. And I'm not afraid to say that when you look at his skill set, because when you look at Robert Whittaker's skill set, he can defend takedowns from an Olympic caliber wrestler. He can strike with basically the best kickboxers in the world. I understand Israel knocked him out, but still, he's a phenomenal striker. And then on the ground too, he has really good jiu-jitsu. So when you look at his game as just a bunch of skills, Robert Whittaker's phenomenal. Then you take into account his absurd recovery. He's got a really good chin, really good cardio. He has a lot of those X factors that you're looking for. I'm not really telling people things they don't know. He was the former champ. But for Jared Cannonier, these are the things I'm worried about. What's the speed of Robert Whittaker going to do to Jared Cannonier? Because I can tell you right now, and it's not even close, Robert Whittaker's so much faster than Jared Cannonier that Cannonier is going to have to find an answer to it. Whether it be the leg kicks like he'd used against Anderson Silva, if he can just get to Whittaker early and really use his power and make Whittaker realize, like, oh shoot, I used to be a welterweight, this guy used to be a heavyweight, and use his physicality, I think he can have some good success in the fight. A few things that I don't like from Jared Cannonier. Not a really big kicker. We don't see a lot of it. He's really heavy with the hands. And against a guy like Whittaker, who has not even really a Muay Thai style. It's sort of an adapted Muay Thai and even like a karate style, because he's got that weird stance. He uses movement well, as I'm trying to show footwork on a chair. He's got that really good footwork. He's got good head movement. And we know what we're going to get from Robert Whittaker. He's going to be there for every minute of the fight. Here's a very disturbing stat, though. Robert Whittaker's been dropped 5 times in his last 3 fights. He got dropped twice by Yoel in their second fight, although I still think he won it. He got dropped twice by Israel, once right at the end of the first round. The second one, of course, when he gets knocked out. And then Darren Till dropped him in like the first minute of their fight. Now, yes, he was able to recover, come back, and have a great performance against Till, and he ate a lot of big shots from Till. I don't think Robert Whittaker has a bad chin by any means. I think he has a very, very good chin. And if his, record can prove anything, it would be that. I just don't like it when guys take that much damage in their 3 last fights. I don't know if we're going to have to start making a stat for if you've been dropped over 5 times in your last 3, then I'm just not going to pick you. But it's really disturbing because, again, we're dealing with not only a good power puncher at the middleweight division, we're dealing with a guy who has knockouts at heavyweight, and now you're fighting Robert Whittaker, a guy who's had a little bit of trouble with the power punchers in those last few punches. But technically, I think Robert Whittaker's a way better striker. I think speed-wise, Whittaker's probably faster. I think on the ground, Whittaker's better. This fight really does come down to, is the physicality, the size, and the strength of Jared Cannonier going to be able to get it done against a Whittaker who, to be completely honest, is this the best version of Whittaker that we have? Is this back 9 Whittaker? Is this maybe a Robert Whittaker who's reinvented himself on the 9th hole and he's ready to make another run? Like, I have a lot of questions about both guys moving into this fight. I just know my excitement level's at about a 10 out of 10.
I mean, maybe after the 9th, he went to the clubhouse, had a couple of brews, and just decided, hey, on this 10th hole, we're going Happy Gilmore, and we're just going to mash. I don't necessarily see that happening. Over on Tapology, at a 555 picks, 3-5, 60% going Whittaker, 72% picking him to win by decision. If we look at the 40% that took Cannonier, 80% saying he's going to win by knockout. Now, Cannonier, like I said, open to minus 145 favorite. A lot of early money came in on Whittaker. Then the line kind of evened out. Cannonier's a minus 122 right now. Whittaker open plus 115. He's a minus 102. So at this point, fan voting on Tapology has Whittaker. You have to take that into account. For somebody to create an account on Tapology and at least vote there shows that they're a pretty big MMA fans. So don't slag the people on Tapology. But at the same time, you got to take everything into account and paint yourself a nice Violent Bob Ross painting. Now in this one, Cannonier on a great run. Like you had said, 3 statement wins, all of them by finish. Silva, take it for what it's worth. For Whittaker, though, taking so much damage, especially against a guy like Darren Till, and something that I'm not sure if we mentioned in the video yet, but we did early on kind of prefacing this fight before the camera started to roll. The fact that Whittaker had that bad cut at the end of that fight against Darren Till, and the big X factor for me, that fight was only 2.5 months ago. You'd think you'd take more time off, but the guy's a sucker for punishment, and he's going to run right back out there against Jared Cannonier. I don't know if I necessarily like that, and that accumulation of damage on Robert Whittaker, I mean, you can see it, 7 years apart in age between these two guys. I just worry about the accumulation of damage. And I'm more, secure with the fresher fighter in Jared Cannonier in this fight, which I never thought I would ever say, especially going back 2 years ago. But I do like Jared Cannonier in this fight.
Again, I said one guy's probably better at everything, but the other guy's quite a bit stronger. I can't pick the guy who is just the strength. I think Robert Whittaker is going to be able to get it done. I think the speed is going to give Jared Cannonier a lot of problems. I think if you look at Jared Cannonier's past, Dominic Reyes is a good example. I understand he's a lot bigger physically and frame-wise, but even Jan Blachowicz fights in a style somewhat similar to Robert Whittaker. Again, he doesn't have the movement, but he does really incorporate his kicks a lot into his game. Those are things that gave Jared Cannonier a lot of trouble. Now, again, we're dealing with a weight class above the one in which he's at right now, but Whittaker, he's the much faster guy. I think he's going to put together his combinations a lot better. And I think he's going to be able to extend Jared Cannonier and make him feel what it's like to be extremely exhausted at 185. Because fatigue at this point, I don't think people realize how crazy it is, first of all, to go from being a heavyweight to a middleweight.
I don't think you do either.
No, but again, he basically lost 80 pounds because he wasn't just a heavyweight. Like, Jared Cannonier weighed in at around 250, and now that he's weighing in at 185, he's been able to keep a lot of the strength that he had at the heavyweight division. He's been able to cut out a lot of the fat. So, really, just a good story for Jared Cannonier. He's gotten into phenomenal shape. But again, it's just really hard to side with the guy who I think is physically much stronger compared to the guy who has all the skill sets. I'm going to rely on the guy who probably has the better game plan and the better skill set to go out there and win the fight, instead of Jared Cannonier, who I'm thinking, well, if he's going to win, he's got to catch Robert Whittaker. I'd rather think Whittaker's going to win the fight than Whittaker's going to make a mistake that will lose in the fight. So I will pick Whittaker. Phenomenal fight.
I'm going 3-round Cannonier based on what I've seen lately. You're going a guy that's been in 5-rounders for some time in Robert Whittaker. So Cannonier, Whittaker, it should be a great fight. It's a great co-main event. It's one of those ones that you get up for. And our main event, oh boy, Justin Gaethje taking on Khabib Nurmagomedov to unify the lightweight belts. It should be a great one. Keep it locked in with Fight Name Picks, Matt, as we always say.
Let's get into it.
It's finally time for our main event of the evening. This fight is an awesome pairing. You've got Justin Gaethje looking to unify his belt, taking on one of the greatest fighters of all time in Khabib Nurmagomedov. You'd be hard-pressed making an argument with me if you didn't want to say that Khabib Nurmagomedov could be the greatest lightweight of all time, and he's looking to add to that trophy case a win over Justin Gaethje. This guy on an absolute tear. And listen, I mean, he had a loss to Eddie Alvarez, he had a loss to Dustin Poirier. Since those 2 losses, holy smokes, this guy has looked amazing. I remember his fight against James Vick where you went, maybe James Vick's got a shot. Well, that guy's no longer in the UFC, and Justin Gaethje has gone full buzzsaw through the competition. Look at his last fight against Tony Ferguson. I mean, Tony Ferguson's been booked to fight Khabib time and time again, and it just has fallen through every time. Well, on short notice, Gaethje comes in, and man, you'd be hard-pressed to put on a better performance against Tony Ferguson. The guy was riding an insane win streak. I mean, his last loss was Michael Johnson. Gaethje had an amazing fight against Michael Johnson. And I mean, when you get to the top of the lightweight division, you're going to have a familiar cast of characters. But Gaethje looked so good in that fight. And again, a lot of people pointing to the corner vice of Trevor Whitman in that fight, saying, hey, you got to take a little bit off your shots. You got to keep pouring on the pressure. By the end of that fight, before he got the finish, he had Tony Ferguson shaking his head. Were you worried about Tony Ferguson's safety as a human being? I mean, it was such a good performance. And I mean, to go back, you want to go back to Justin Gaethje's early days. If you want to talk about wrestling, his striking wasn't there. And he would just pick guys up and throw them. That was his way of winning fights. For Khabib Nurmagomedov, he can do that. He can stand and box with you. I mean, I'd be hard-pressed to find a better striking differential in the UFC. 4.11 strikes landed per minute to 1.65 absorbed. 67% striking defense for Khabib Nurmagomedov. You know exactly what the plan is unless you're Al Iaquinta and he decides to box with you, and Joe Rogan won't like that. But it's rinse and repeat with the takedowns. And this guy, to have a record of 28-0 is amazing. And I know a lot of people are probably going to point in the comments section to the fact that, well, remember the time he fought Gleison Tibau?
I don't care.
And he probably lost that fight.
Stop.
That has zero bearing to this fight in 2020 because Khabib Nurmagomedov has just consistently proved it against the best levels of competition. And I know that fight against Al Iaquinta, that was 3 ago. He beats Conor McGregor. He beats Dustin Poirier to the point where Poirier was considering retirement. Now he's on a resurgence. But this fight is such a good fight, and it's tough to try and gauge what you're going to get. But Matt, I'm going to just leave my level of excitement here for a second. I'll let you take over. What do you make of this fight?
This fight's going to be amazing. Okay, Justin Gaethje, after almost every one of his wins, says with tears in his eyes, I'm willing to die in here. And, like, that gives you goosebumps if you act... Like, he doesn't just say it, too, because there's a lot of fighters who are like, I'm going to die in this cage. Justin Gaethje believes it. And there's something... Like, there's this weird kind of inner peace that you must feel if you've actually come to that realization that, like, I'm willing to risk everything just to win a fight. Because in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really mean that much. But Justin Gaethje, it doesn't matter whether it's on the feet, whether it's on the ground. Justin Gaethje... And I think this does really matter. There's no quit in him. And I do think Khabib makes a lot of his opponents quit. I do think the Conor fight is a pretty good example of that. Whereas just by the end of that fight, Conor wasn't really going to be able to do much. You could tell he was tired. He didn't have the pop in his shots to the same degree. And yes, he got choked out with a brutal neck crank. But you just tell the writing was on the wall going into that. And same thing with Dustin. Like, Dustin, you think he might have cracked Khabib. And it's like, oh my goodness. And you guys know I'm the biggest Dustin fan in the world. So I'm like, he could knock him out. And then he almost gets in that guillotine. And then it was like... well, now what? And then Khabib just like... Khabib is just... He's like a tide. You can't stop it no matter how bad you want to. And he's just going to keep on coming in a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, until it is the 4th round, or it is the 5th round. And you're not only exhausted, but he's not. And that's something that we don't talk about a lot, where there's fighters who have good cardio, but they don't really have the highest output ever. So it's pretty easy to have good cardio if you're just waiting to throw that big shot, and then waiting, and then throwing the big shot. Whereas Khabib... He has the output of Max Holloway, but in takedown attempts, where it's no matter what it is, I'm going to use my striking, I'm going to get a hold of your leg. And something Daniel Cormier talks about a lot in the broadcast, there's wrestling, then there's chain wrestling. And wrestling is, I'm going to shoot my double leg Chael Sonnen style. If I don't get it, okay, reset. We'll just go back to the center of the cage, and I'll try to work more for it. With Khabib, it's, I'm going to go to the single leg, then I'll go to the double, then I'll try to get your back, and then I'm going to clinch you up against the cage, and then I'm going to get you down, and then you're going to try to get back up, and I'm just going to keep on breaking your posture over and over and over again. And yes, it sounds like an oversimplification, but that's really what Khabib does. He just breaks your will a little bit.
And then when you're in the center of the cage and you're striking and you might feel good about yourself, he's going to go in for an ankle pick. Like, the guy can do just about everything.
Not even that. Not even the ankle pick. He's not bad at striking. Like, I don't know if Khabib's opponents just think, okay, just defend the takedown and I'll be okay. Yes, Khabib's not as good of a striker as he is a grappler, because he's arguably the greatest grappler to ever compete in MMA, but his striking's not bad by any stretch of the imagination. And you say, yes, he boxes Al Iaquinta. he did outstrike Ally Quinta, and that is something that I do think matters. Because Ally Quinta, he's a little basic in his game plan. He's just, a good wrestle boxer.
Super short notice.
Exactly, and he's not going to be the most flashy guy, but it's super short notice for Khabib, too, fighting a guy who he thought he was going to fight Tony Ferguson, who doesn't fight anything like Ally Quinta. I just mean, Khabib's not as bad of a striker as I think a lot of people think he is. I think a lot of people just assume, okay, he's so good on the ground that there must be a weakness in his game. Yes, his striking is a weakness, but we're talking about weaknesses for some of the greatest fighters ever. And I just don't think that if Justin can defend a few takedowns, the whole story is going to be, well, Justin's just going to beat up Khabib on his feet. I do think Gaethje has the better chance to win on the feet. I don't think he's going to go out there and triangle choke Khabib off his back. I just don't like the narrative of if Khabib can't get the takedown, he's utterly useless. Because I don't think that's very fair.
Now, the thing that I like in this fight, this is arguably the toughest stylistic matchup for Khabib Nurmagomedov. It's something that a lot of people are going to talk about because that All-American wrestling status of Justin Gaethje, that has to play a factor in this one. And it does. And Matt, I know before we even started taping, again, behind the fourth wall, a little inside baseball, the fact that Justin Gaethje's been taken down. He's been taken down in the UFC.
A few times.
You go back and watch even the Luis Palomino fights with PFL. They're awesome. You should definitely go back and watch some. They're a lot of fun. But Gaethje will get taken down, but he can spring back up to his feet too. Now, it's going to be a lot tougher to do that against arguably the greatest lightweight of all time. But goats lose. It'll happen. George St. Pierre lost to Matt Serra. Things happen. It's a crazy world.
Here's the problem with that. It's really hard to say a guy's going to lose if you've never seen it happen before. Even GSP going into the Matt Serra fight, he had lost to Matt Hughes. So it just... I always can think about heavyweight MMA when I think of this. Heavyweight MMA fighters are different when they haven't been knocked out before. And I don't know why, but in my head, until you've been knocked out, I look at you differently. Right now, Francis to me is still pretty much indestructible because I haven't seen him get finished yet. And I haven't seen him meet his limits. Yes, Stipe made him tired, and yes, Stipe might be the better skill-wise, but he didn't knock him out, he didn't submit him. GSP got stopped before that fight. Matt Hughes armbar. I've never even seen Khabib in a mildly compromising position. I've seen him get
place and T-bow.
Again, but don't even bring that fight up. If people bring that fight up, it just aggravates me at this point because it's the only thing that you have to hold on to hope. This is how good Khabib is. Everyone just dislikes him and they want to believe that he's not invincible. And no, he's not invincible. Nobody is. But he's as close to it as you can humanly get. This is how good Khabib is. Just my last thing. People talk about him moving up to 70 just because they want to see him lose to Kamaru. That's the only way that you can even conceivably think that someone could beat Khabib Nurmagomedov, is that he might have to move up in weight to either fight GSP or Usman. No one at lightweight's going to beat this guy. I'm just hot take of right now. Justin Gaethje famously says, I don't train off my back very much because I've spent my whole life defending takedowns. Well, I've seen you getting taken down before, and it only takes one from Khabib. If I know he can take you down in that first round, he can take you down in the second round. He can take you down in the third, fourth, and fifth. And the great thing about his takedowns are, he only needs one a round because his top control is so dominant.
Justin Gaethje, the thing about him is, again, you mentioned it, zero quit. And this guy, if he's not throwing 100% into his shots, and if he's still only going 70, he throws harder than 50% of all the lightweights. Do your math there, it makes zero sense. But the guy still throws very, very hard. And he doesn't have to put everything into his shots to do so. The other thing that you have to like about Gaethje, and this is a troubling thing, he has to employ the leg kicks. It's the hottest thing in MMA, and it's one of those things where they always used to say, let's go back 5 years ago, the kryptonite for a good striker was, hey, if you start throwing kicks against a wrestler, you're going to get taken down, you're going to lose. That low kick's tricky, though, because you can't see it. It's out of your line of sight, so it's always tough to check leg kicks, and it's always tough when they're trying to close distance. With Khabib, though, we're talking about a different fighter, and I already went into it a little bit. If you're in the center of the cage and you're trying to get your kick game going, the ankle picks, the low singles, the low takedowns that you don't see from a lot of those wrestlers. And then once he starts to chain takedowns along, you're really in trouble. If you're somebody that's good in the clinch, you're going to have a hard time being good in the clinch against Khabib Nurmagomedov. And when we talk about fighters that are going to beat Khabib, there was a name that always used to come up, Kevin Lee. I think Justin Gaethje is like Kevin Lee on, I don't know, all of the supplements that you can find.
Saw the approved ones.
Justin Gaethje is such a good martial artist. For him to be where he's at, it's a tough spot. Khabib opened as a minus 350. He's now minus 308 average on best fight odds. Gaethje opened plus 285, now plus 244. There was a lot of money that came in on Gaethje really early. Out of the total picks over on Tapology, 587, 68% going to Nurmagomedov, 48% saying he's going to get the win by submission. I think that's wild. But I love this fight. This is such a good fight. And Justin Gaethje's such a good opponent. That's what makes this. If this was Khabib against Barboza again, would I get up for it as much as I am right now? Not necessarily. Barboza has good takedown defense, and he's such a good striker. Justin Gaethje's so much more than that. That's why it makes this such a good fight.
So, now, do you think Justin Gaethje can keep his back off the fence? Because a lot of Khabib's success in his takedowns do not come just in the middle of the cage. They come because he is able to pressure his opponent up against the cage. So, do you think Justin Gaethje either A, will be able to circle off the fence enough that won't be a problem? Or do you think that he kind of realizes he's going to have to play the wrestling game for at least some portions of this fight, and he'll just kind of pick and choose his moments?
Do I think that Justin Gaethje's trained his wrestling for Khabib? I do. I think that he's going to have the wherewithal to try and move away from the cage in something like this.
The only issues that I have is Khabib, A, that's his whole game. He backs you up against the cage, he takes you down. The leg kicks of Justin Gaethje, I do think are a good point, because he doesn't even throw them in a traditional sense. Like with Edson, I think Edson is a much better kicker than Justin Gaethje. Justin Gaethje can throw a leg kick when you guys are this close together. So he almost throws them from the clinch, and that's one of the really unique things about Gaethje's game that he doesn't get credit for. But the problem is, to throw a leg kick, you gotta get close. And his best leg kicks are from a really close distance. So you're gonna have to close the distance and do it, guys.
There's this thing, too, with Gaethje. When he gets his hands up and he throws them, well, then it's pretty tough to try and get away from a takedown of Khabib, especially if you're in close, too.
Exactly. So I do think that Justin Gaethje, when you just kind of look at the bare bones of his game, you're like, wow, he's kind of built to beat a guy like Khabib. He's got the takedown defense.
He's got a shot.
Yeah, he has absurdly heavy hands. He's got the leg kicks. He has things that are going to give Khabib problems. But when you really dive deeper into it and kind of look for those X factors, when he blocks, he does have a high guard. He brings his hand up. Well, his leg kicks do kind of open up an avenue for the takedowns. And, his cardio, again, that's the thing about Gaethje too. His cardio is misleading because in some fights, like the Eddie Alvarez fight, he eats
the Michael Johnson fight.
He eats a lot of body shots in the Alvarez fight, and of course that would have something to do with your cardio. But you can tell that as that fight goes on, he's starting to get tired. Poirier fight too. He has such a high output throughout those first 3 rounds, and he says it himself. He figured when he was still undefeated that if he ever got stopped, it would be in the 4th, 5th round of a fight because he throws such a crazy volume for those first 3 rounds that he's probably going to get tired by it. So Khabib's whole game plan is, I'm going to take you down, I'm going to make you tired, I'm going to choke you out. You know what you can't out-tough? A choke. You just go to sleep. So I think Justin Gaethje's going to, and this sounds so cheesy, he's going to try his best. He's going to give it his all because there is no quit in Justin Gaethje. And again, I'm not just saying that in an MMA sense. Like, Justin Gaethje is unique in that aspect where, he's willing to die. And I do believe him when he says it. I just don't think it's going to be enough. I think Khabib, until he does fight, I don't even know who beats Khabib. And this is wild because lightweight's probably the best division in MMA history right now.
Khabib Nurmagomedov, the one other X factor, and I don't want to dive into it too much, but you have to talk about it. The fact that Abdulmanap's not going to be in his corner. And I know we have, a couple of fighters that coming out of the camp. We've got Umar Nurmagomedov on this. You're going to have the cousins and the close relatives. You're going to have everybody supporting him in the corner, training with him. And we've seen it in Fight Island, a lot of his teammates there as well. I mean, we've had Zubair Tukhugov competing recently. Islam Makhachev, is he going to have a fight coming up soon? Who knows? But we've had a lot of support for Khabib Nurmagomedov. That's another one because Justin Gaethje's been with the stalwart coach in Trevor Whitman, and things have been really rolling with those two guys now. With Khabib, you wonder. I mean, he's got a great mind in his corner in Javier Mendez and the support from AKA. Yeah. I don't see it being that big of an issue. If anything, it's a motivating factor. So with all of that being said, yes, I've got the Eagle to get the win in this fight. Would I be absolutely shocked if Justin Gaethje won? No, because if anybody's going to do it, it's going to be Justin Gaethje. I think this is a highly competitive fight, but I'm going to go with the and still, which is weird because you got the true champ versus the interim champ. I'm going to go with the and still to unify the belts with Khabib Nurmagomedov.
Yeah, Justin Gaethje is so good, and that's why I do think we have to put Khabib in that kind of GOAT conversation, because he's a 3-1 favorite over a guy like Justin Gaethje, and Justin Gaethje's been in there with just some of the greatest fighters in lightweight history, and again, Khabib's champ right now at a time where the division's full of guys like Conor, like Tony, like Gaethje, like Dustin, guys who, maybe excluding Conor, but other, like, Tony Ferguson is an all-time great lightweight. I would argue Poirier is an all-time great lightweight. I would argue Gaethje is an all-time great lightweight. And Khabib's the king of this division right now, just full of killers. So I think Khabib If he's not under Mount Rushmore yet, by the time he retires, he probably will be. I've got him to win. I'm even going to go as far as to say I'll win by submission.
Matt, I'm really looking forward to this fight. We both have Khabib Nurmagomedov to keep his belt and pick up that interim one if that's a thing. I'm really looking forward to this card. We got a great co-main event, Whittaker and Cannonier. There's so many good fights, so make sure you check out the playlist. Support the team, toss the likes and the subs, and Matt, I'm really looking forward to this card. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say,
Let's get into it.